everybody. Welcome to Readings in Isolation. Thank you, Joanna. It's always the same music, but it's good. Obviously I haven't been on vacation, but I am back. I did have a little emergency that required my full attention. And yeah, back doing well. And I will continue, as usual, where Joanna left off. We are already at the 19th night, and I am continuing the tale. That was the tale with the calandras and the procuratrix. This is basically the end of it. All right, let's get comfortable. Now when it was the 19th night, she continued, "It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the Caliph commanded this story and those of the sister and the Kalandars to be recorded in the archives and be set in the royal muniment chambers. Then he asked the eldest lady, the mistress of the house, 'Knowest thou the whereabouts of the Ifrita who spelled thy sisters?' And she answered, 'O Commander of the Faithful, she gave me a ringlet of her hair, saying, Whenas thou wouldest see me, burn a couple of these hairs, and I will be with thee forthright, even though I were beyond Caucasus mountain.' Quoth the Caliph, 'Bring me hither the hair.' So she brought it, and he threw the whole lock upon the fire. As soon as the odour of the burning hair dispread itself, the palace shook and trembled, and all present heard a rumbling and rolling of thunder, and a noise as of wings. And lo, the Jinniyah, who had been a serpent, stood in the Caliph's presence. Now she was a Muslimah, so she saluted him and said, 'Peace be with thee, O Vicar of Allah.' Whereto he replied, 'And with thee also be peace and the mercy of Allah and his blessings.' Then she continued, 'Know that this damsel sowed for me the seed of kindness, wherefore I cannot enough requite her, in that she delivered me from death and destroyed mine enemy. Now I had seen how her sisters dealt with her, and felt myself bound to avenge her on them. At first I was minded to slay them, but I feared it would be grievous to her, so I transformed them to bitches. But if thou desire their release, O Commander of the Faithful, I will release them to pleasure thee and her, for I am of the Muslims.' Quoth the Caliph, 'Release them, and after we will look into the affair of the beaten lady and consider her case carefully, and if the truth of her story be evidence, I will exact retaliation from him who wronged her.' Said the Ifrita, 'O Commander of the Faithful, I will forthwith release them, and will discover to thee the man who did that deed by this lady, and wronged her and took her property, and he is the nearest of all men to thee.' So saying, she took a cup of water, and muttered a spell over it, and uttered words there was no understanding. Then she sprinkled some of the water over the faces of the two bitches, saying, 'Return to your former human shape.' Whereupon they were restored to their natural forms, and fell to praising their Creator. Then said the Ifrita, 'O Commander of the Faithful, of a truth, he who scourged this lady with rods is thy son, Al-Amin, brother of Al-Mamnoon, for he had heard of her beauty and loveliness, and he played a lover's stratagram with her, and married her according to the law, and committed the crime, such as it is, of scourging her. Yet indeed he is not to be blamed for beating her, for he laid a condition on her, and swore her by a solemn oath not to do a certain thing. However, she was false to her vow, and he was minded to put her to death. But he feared Almighty Allah, and contented himself with scourging her, as thou hast seen, and with sending her back to her own place. Such is the story of the second lady, and the Lord knoweth all. When the Caliph heard these words of the Ifritah, and knew who had beaten the damsel, he marvelled with mighty marvel, and said, Praise be to Allah, the Most High, the Almighty, who hath shown his exceeding mercy towards me, enabling me to deliver these two damsels from sorcery and torture, and vouchsafing to let me know the secret of this lady's history. And now, by Allah, we will do a deed which shall be recorded of us after we are no more. Then he summoned his son, Al-Amin, and questioned him of the story of the second lady, the portress. And he told it in the face of truth. Whereupon the Caliph bade call into the presence of the Qazis, and the witnesses, and the three Qalandars, and the first lady with her sisters, German, who had been ensorcelled. And he married the three to the three Qalandars, whom he knew to be princes and sons of kings. And he appointed them chamberlains about his person, assigning to them allowances and all that they required, and lodging them in his palace at Baghdad. He returned the beaten lady to his son Al-Amin, renewing the marriage contract between them, and gave her great wealth, and bade rebuild the house fairer than it was before. As for himself, he took to wife the procuratrix, and lay with her that night, and next day he set apart for her an apartment in his seraglio, with handmaidens for her service, and a fixed daily allowance. And the people marvelled at the Caliph's generosity and natural beneficence and princely wisdom, nor did he forget to send all these histories to be recorded in his annals. When Shahrazad ceased speaking, Dunyazad exclaimed, O my own sister, by Allah, in very sooth, this is a right pleasant tale, and never was heard the like of it. But tell me now another story, to while away what yet remaineth of the waking hours of this our night. She replied, With love and gladness, if the king give me leave. And he said, Tell thy tale, and tell it quickly. So she began in these words. The Tale of the Three Apples. They relate, O King of the age and Lord of the time and of these days, that the Caliph Harun al-Rashid summoned his vizier Jafar one night and said to him, I desire to go down into the city and question the common folk concerning the conduct of those charged with its governance, and those of whom they complain we will dispose from office, and those whom they commend we will promote. Quoth Jafar, hearkening and obedience. So the Caliph went down with Jafar and eunuch Masrur to the town, and walked about the streets and markets. And as they were threading a narrow alley, they came upon a very old man with a fishing net and crate to carry small fish on his head, and in his hand a staff. And as he walked at a leisurely pace, he repeated these lines. They say me, thou shinest a light to mankind, with thy law as the night, which the moon doth uplight. I answer, a truce to your jests and your jibes. Without luck, what is learning? A poor devil white. If they take me to pawn with my law in my pouch, with my volumes to read and my ink case to write, for one day's provision they never could pledge me, as likely on doomsday to draw bill at sight. How poorly indeed doth it fare with the poor, with his pauper existence and beggarly plight. In summer he faileth provision to find, in winter the fire pot's his only delight. The street dogs with bite and with bark to him rise, and each louther receives him with bark and with bite. If he lift up his voice and complain of his wrong, none pities or helps him, however he's right. And when sorrows and evils like these he must brave, his happiest homestead were down in the grave. When the Caliph heard his verses, he said to Ja'far, see this poor man and note his verses, for surely they point to his necessities. Then he accosted him and asked, O Shaykh, what be thine occupation? And the poor man answered, O my lord, I am a fisherman with a family to keep, and I have been out between midday and this time, and not a thing hath Allah made my portion, wherewithal to feed my family. I cannot even pawn myself to buy them a supper, and I hate and disgust my life, and I hanker after death. Quoth the Caliph, say me, wilt thou return with us to Tigris' bank, and cast thy net on my luck, and whatsoever turneth up I will buy of thee for 100 gold pieces. The man rejoiced when he heard these words and said, on my head be it, I will go back with you. And returning with them riverwards, made a cast and waited a while. Then he hauled in the rope and dragged the net ashore, and there appeared in it a chest padlocked and heavy. The Caliph examined it and lifted it, finding it weighty. So he gave the fisherman 200 dinars and sent him about his business, whilst Masrur, aided by the Caliph, carried the chest to the palace and set it down and lighted the candles. Ja'far and Masrur then broke it open and found therein a basket of palm leaves corded with red worsted. This they cut open and saw within it a piece of carpet, which they lifted out, and under it was a woman's mantilla folded in four, which they pulled out, and at the bottom of the chest they came upon a young lady, fair as silver, slain and cut into 19 pieces. When the Caliph looked upon her, he cried, Alas! And tears ran down his cheeks. And turning to Ja'far, he said, O dog of viziers, shall folk be murdered in our reign and be cast into the river to be a burden and a responsibility for us on the day of the doom? By Allah, we must avenge this woman on her murderer, and he shall be made die the worst of deaths. Excuse me. And presently he added, Now, as surely as we are descended from the sons of Abbas, if thou bring us not him who slew her, that we do her justice on him, I will hang thee at the gate of my palace, thee and 40 of thy kith and kin by thy side. And the Caliph was wroth with exceeding rage. Quoth Ja'far, grant me 3 days' delay. And quoth the Caliph, we grant thee this. So Ja'far went out from before him, and returned to his own house, full of sorrow, and saying to himself, how shall I find who murdered this damsel, that I may bring him before the Caliph? If I bring other than the murderer, it will be laid to my charge by the Lord. In very sooth, I wot not what to do. He kept his house 3 days, and on the 4th day, the Caliph sent one of the chamberlains for him, and as he came into the presence, asked him, where is the murderer of the damsel? To which answered Ja'far, O Commander of the Faithful, am I inspector of murdered folk that I should ken who killed her? The Caliph was furious at his answer, and bade hang him before the palace gate, and commanded that a crier cry through the streets of Baghdad, whoso would see the hanging of Ja'far, the Barmaki, vizier of the Caliph, with 40 of the Barmecides, his cousins and kinsmen, before the palace gate, let him come and let him look. The people flocked out from all the quarters of the city to witness the execution of Ja'far and his kinsmen, not knowing the cause. Then they set up the gallows, and made Ja'far and the others stand underneath, in readiness for execution. But whilst every eye was looking for the Caliph's signal, and the crowd wept for Ja'far and his cousins of the Barmecides, lo and behold, a young man, fair of face and neat of dress, and a favour like the moon raining light, with eyes black and bright, and brow flower white, and cheeks red as rose, and young down where the beard grows, and a mole like a grain of ambergris, pushed his way through the people, till he stood immediately before the vizier, and said to him, Safety to thee from this strait, O Prince of the Emirs, and Asylum of the poor. I am the man who slew the woman ye found in the chest, so hang me for her, and do her justice on me. When Ja'far heard the youth's confession, he rejoiced at his own deliverance, but grieved and sorrowed for the fair youth. And whilst they were yet talking, behold, another man, well stricken in years, pressed forwards through the people, and thrust his way amid the populace, till he came to Ja'far and the youth, whom he saluted, saying, Ho, thou the vizier and prince and peer, believe not the words of this youth. Of a surety none murdered the damsel but I. Take her wreak on me this moment. For, an thou do not thus, I will require it of thee before Almighty Allah. Then quoth the young man, O vizier, this is an old man, in his dotage, who wotteth not whatso he saith ever, and I am he who murdered her, so do thou avenge her on me. Quoth the old man, O my son, thou art young and desirest the joys of the world, and I am old and weary, and surfeited with the world. I will offer my life as a ransom for thee, and for the vizier and his cousins. No one murdered the damsel but I, so Allah upon thee make haste to hang me, for no life is left in me, now that hers is gone. The vizier marvelled much at all this strangeness, and taking the young man and the old man, carried them before the Caliph, where, after kissing the ground 7 times between his hands, he said, "O commander of the faithful, I bring thee the murderer of the damsel." "Where is he?" asked the Caliph. And Ja'afar answered, "This young man said, 'I am the murderer,' and this old man, giving him the lie, said, 'I am the murderer.' And behold, here are the twain standing before thee." The Caliph looked at the old man and the young man and asked, "Which of you killed the girl?" The young man replied, "No one slew her save I." And the old man answered, "Indeed, none killed her but myself." Then said the Caliph to Ja'afar, "Take the twain and hang them both." But Ja'afar rejoined, "Since one of them was the murderer, to hang the other were mere injustice." "By him who raised the firmament and dispread the earth like a carpet," cried the youth, "I am he who slew the damsel." And he went on to describe the manner of her murder, and the basket, the mantilla, and the bit of carpet, in fact all that the Caliph had found upon her. So the Caliph was certified that the young man was the murderer. Whereat he wondered and asked him, "What was the cause of thy wrongfully doing this damsel to die? And what made thee confess the murder without the bastinado? And what brought thee here to yield up thy life? And what made thee say, 'Do her, wreak upon me'?" The youth answered, "Know, O commander of the faithful, that this woman was my wife and the mother of my children, also my first cousin and the daughter of my paternal uncle, this old man, who is my father's own brother. When I married her, she was a maid, and Allah blessed me with 3 male children by her. She loved me and served me, and I saw no evil in her, for I also loved her with fondest love. Now on the first day of this month, she fell ill with grievous sickness, and I fetched in physicians to her, but recovery came to her little by little. And when I wished her to go to the hammam bath, she said, 'There is a something I long for before I go to the bath, and I long for it with an exceeding longing.' 'To hear is to comply,' said I, 'and what is it?' Quoth she, 'I have a queasy craving for an apple, to smell it and bite a bit of it.' I replied, 'Hadst thou 1,000 longings, I would try to satisfy them.' So I went on the instant into the city and sought for apples, but could find none. Yet had they cost a gold piece each, would I have bought them. I was vexed at this, and went home and said, 'O daughter of my uncle, by Allah I can find none.' She was distressed, being yet very weakly, and her weakness increased greatly on her that night, and I felt anxious and alarmed on her account. As soon as morning dawned, I went out again and made the round of the gardens one by one, but found no apples anywhere. At last there met me an old gardener, of whom I asked about them, and he answered, 'O my son, this fruit is a rarity with us, and is not to be found save in the garden of the Commander of the Faithful at Bassora, where the gardener keepeth it for the Caliph's eating.' I returned to my house, troubled by my ill success, and my love for my wife and my affection moved me to undertake the journey. So I got me ready and set out and travelled 15 days and nights, going and coming, and brought her 3 apples which I bought from the gardener for 3 dinars. But when I went in to my wife and set them before her, she took no pleasure in them, and let them lie by her side, for her weakness and fever had increased on her, and her malady lasted without abating 10 days, after which time she began to recover health. So I left my house, and betaking me to my shop, sat there buying and selling, and about midday, behold, a great, ugly slave, long as a lance and broad as a bench, passed by my shop, holding in hand one of the 3 apples wherewith he was playing. Quoth I, O my good slave, tell me, whence thou tookest that apple, that I may get the like of it. He laughed and answered, I got it from my mistress, for I had been absent, and on my return I found her lying ill with 3 apples by her side, and she said to me, my horned whittle of a husband made a journey for them to Bassorah, and bought them for 3 dinars. So I ate and drank with her, and took this one from her. When I heard such words from the slave, O Commander of the Faithful, the world grew black before my face, and I arose and locked up my shop, and went home beside myself for excess of rage. I looked for the apples, and finding only 2 of the 3, asked my wife, O my cousin, where is the 3rd apple? And raising her head, languidly she answered, I wot not, O son of my uncle, where 'tis gone. This convinced me that the slave had spoken the truth. So I took a knife, and coming behind her, got upon her breast without a word said, and cut her throat. Then I hewed off her head and her limbs in pieces, and wrapping her in her mantilla and a rag of carpet, hurriedly sewed up the hole, which I set in a chest, and locking it tight, loaded it on my he-mule, and threw it into the Tigris with my own hands. So Allah upon thee, O Commander of the Faithful, make haste to hang me, as I fear lest she appeal for vengeance on Resurrection Day. For when I had thrown her into the river, and none knew aught of it, as I went back home, I found my eldest son crying, and yet he knew naught of what I had done with his mother. I asked him, What hath made thee weep, my boy? And he answered, I took one of the 3 apples which were by my mommy, and went down into the lane to play with my brethren, when behold, a big, long, ugly slave snatched it from my hand and said, Whence hadst thou this? Quoth I, My father travelled far for it, and brought it from Bassorah for my mother who was ill, and 2 other apples, for which he paid 3 dinars. He took no heed of my words, and I asked for the apple a 2nd and a 3rd time, but he cuffed me and kicked me and went off with it. I was afraid lest my mother should swinge me on account of the apple. So for fear of her, I went with my brother outside the city and stayed there till evening closed in upon us. And indeed I am in fear of her. And now by Allah, O my father, say nothing to her of this, or it may add to her ailment. When I heard what my child said, I knew that the slave was he who had foully slandered my wife, the daughter of my uncle, and was certified that I had slain her wrongfully. So I wept with exceeding weeping, and presently this old man, my paternal uncle, and her father came in, and I told him what had happened, and he sat down by my side and wept, and we ceased not weeping till midnight. We have kept up mourning for her these last 5 days, and we lamented her in the deepest sorrow for that she was unjustly done to die. This came from the lying of the slave, and this was the manner of my killing her. So I conjure thee by the honour of thine ancestors, make haste to kill me, and do her justice upon me, as there is no living for me after her. The Caliph marvelled at his words and said, By Allah, the young man is excusable. I will hang none but the accursed slave, and I will do a deed which shall comfort the ill at ease and suffering, and which shall please the all-glorious king. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of day and ceased saying her permitted say. What a story. I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. And I wish you a wonderful night, a great sleep with lovely dreams, and may the sun shine for you tomorrow. And always remember going inwards instead of outwards. Have a wonderful evening, everyone, and thanks for watching. Thank you, Elmira. Oh my God, my cousin was watching. She's British. And Christian. Thanks, Joanna, and everyone else. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Bye.